Hi guys. So I'm Samir Patel. I'm CEO of Kahuna. If you don't know who Kahuna is, we are. I'll just make sure that I can expense my trip back home and tell you a minute about what we do. We're a B2C marketing automation platform, and what we do is we can understand gestures of what consumers are doing within seconds, and then we apply machine learning to figure out the right place, right channel, right time, right message, and we could work with your existing email service providers and whatever technologies you have in place. We kind of fit into your environment. So that's us, the Dollar Shave Club, Yelp, Yahoo, a lot of fun modern brands that work with us. I'm new to the industry. I've been in the industry for about a year, and one of the biggest realizations that I had as I started to talk to customers in the space was, when you start to look at all of the big tectonic changes that are happening around us today, you see Amazon getting into the physical space, you see Walmart buying bonobos, Nike selling through Amazon now. When you size all of that up, the question that's in my mind is, are these very sort of tactical, disconnected moves that vendors are making? Or is there a thread to be had across all of these big moves? Because they're really, really big moves. And the thing that is coming off to me, and which is really the essence of a lot of what we're going to talk about over the course of the day, is there one thing you could pull out that sort of helps you understand what is the nucleus of all of these really, really big, bold moves that are happening in commerce right now? And in my opinion, the big thing that's happening here is a mad rush towards up-leveling the game to personalization and truly understanding and being able to really go as far as you can to really understand what every one of your consumers wants and looks at, right? What does Amazon buying Whole Foods mean? It means that it starts to really understand an entire chunk of my share of wallet and my spend, which they really didn't have a really good sense of. That's a ton of data that they have in terms of understanding how I drive through a whole other different preference of purchase preference. Most of you here, I have 2 kids, and we went through back to school. The truth is we shopped at Target and Walmart, and I shop at Bonobos. So from Walmart's perspective, to truly understand who I am has to go beyond the traditional goods and services that they've been selling if they are really serious about understanding who I am. Because my buying patterns expand across a whole bunch of brands, some high-end, some not so high-end. And the data that Nike can get back about all of our preferences today is going to be 1,000x off of Amazon than they could have ever gotten out of Nike.com. The holistic data set about what I'm doing, what I'm interested in, that they can glean off of the broader footprint that I have on Amazon.com will never, ever be able to be matched by Nike. So, when you look at these trends and you try to understand what is disruption, my true belief is that we are at the starting point of a whole new round of e-commerce disruption. This is not incremental. These big changes we just talked about is going to force an entirely new way of thinking that most modern brands are looking at. And what I'd like to sort of share with you today is I think it's anybody's game. Anyone, whether you're a 50-year-old company or a 5-year-old company, has a shot at being a real player in this, right? So the first thing you looked at is, and one of my biggest pet peeves is the word disruption. It's so carelessly thrown around today. People do a little cute marketing campaign and they're like, we disrupted stuff. No, like disruption, to really mean disruption, you have to up-level the game. And I think this is one of the best definitions where if you are not expanding your market size, you are not truly disrupting. If you are just purely finding an interesting way to sell or a better way to connect with a customer, but you haven't created a bigger market, that's the bar that I look at when I think of disruption. So let's start with the most overused example on the planet, Uber. Uber created a lot more supply in their model, and I think you would all agree with me that most of us take a lot more cabs now that there's Uber compared to how much you might have before. That's expanding the market size. Airbnb did not try to steal a hotel room from Marriott and from the Sheraton. Airbnb tried to say, how do we let people who cannot afford to travel create memories and moments in their lives by finding a much more affordable, approachable way to find boarding and lodging, right? That is expanding the market. That's many more rooms available, and that's many more of us willing to take short vacations because we can create memories. amazing, right? Some other early good examples, Wayfair and Ashley Furniture, both amazing brands. And this is, by the way, not revenue because obviously these are private companies, but this is Google Trends. And all I'm trying to prove here is how the interest level in different ideas are going up where, a company like Wayfair allows you to, in a very human way and a comfortable way, take out the anxiety that comes with buying furniture. I've bought furniture from them. They made it so easy for me to return something. I had a defect. They said, don't even bother returning it. We believe you. I will always stay with someone like that. That is, again, a way of truly, truly understanding the consumer and leveling with you and me in a way that is just unprecedented. We talked about Airbnb. We can move through this. Casper Mattress is another one. Whoever thought you'd be buying mattresses online? And again, they figured out how we want to consume mattresses. They look to consume the purchase experience of a mattress. Could they change that? Could they really use technology for us to feel like this is something that I'm willing to look at? I feel comfortable. I can return it. It comes packaged in a way that is easy. That again is going the extra step to understand what you and I think, how you and I feel about buying goods and services. So there's two really big trends, and these are kind of examples that I've brought up here, which I think represent brands that have come out of nowhere in the last 5 to 10 years. And if you had to quickly look at sort of what are the two things you would pull out of the examples that we just used. First is, none of these brands are beholden to a way that packaged software expects that you deal with the customer. They all started with, how do I want this customer to engage with me? And they back that into how I buy technology, how I use technology, which is why many of them even built their own technology and said, I don't see anything out there that can support the kind of customer experience that I want to, right? The second thing that these brands did is they quickly employed new channels, right? Mobile showed up in the last 7 or 8 years in the way that it's used today. They were hitting customers via email. Now they found, mobile channels to hit customers, SMS, in-app, on and on and on. And they found that they were able to get to customers from sort of multi-pronged approach, if you will. I don't want to call it cross, but at least multiple channels. So you look at the consequence of these movements have allowed an entire new set of brands to elbow their way in to a world that we thought was sort of dominated by the Amazons of the world, right? So where to from here, and why is it that there's a new trend? If you listen to sort of some of the bigger moves we talked about before, in spite of all of this stuff that we just saw and these amazing brands that we've all got to know and love, I mean, this is the reality. This is pretty fresh research out there that's saying that, as we started to employ all these brand new tools and we brought mobile in, the reality and the opportunity, frankly, for everyone in the room here is that there is a lot of room out there to really, really be able to reconnect with these consumers. And there's a lot of play left in this ballgame, right? There's consumers are now voting with their wallets and saying, you can't keep hammering me, just because you couldn't get me in an email, you can't keep hammering me on a mobile device. You have to truly understand who I am, what messages resonate with me. The amount of breadcrumbs we're leaving out there, right, these days, digital breadcrumbs we're leaving on our phones, the consumer's expecting a 10x experience in exchange for the kind of breadcrumbs we're leaving. I mean, if someone told you, 7 or 8 years ago, you'd be letting a company called Uber always monitor your location, you'd laugh them out the door. But the reality is Uber is giving you 10x back, and it's surprising how much we're willing to expose to them, right? But that's the kind of experience that is going to be required, and that's going to dictate where brands go, right? But we're not there yet, as you can see with these stats. So we can look at this and all be disappointed, or we can look at all of this and say that means there's an opportunity for people to come back. If you were not a player in the last round dominated by the modern brands we just talked about, as the next round begins, it doesn't matter if you're a 100-year-old company or a 1-year-old company. There is opportunity to truly, truly think about what extreme personalization means and start to build a model around it, right? So I don't think any of the brands I just talked about, which was a bit of a love fest because I love most of them, puts any of them in the clear. Like they're not in the clear. This is where that customer feels like the customer or the state of the customer, which means any one of you can look at any one of those brands or those models and say, how do I recreate it and win in the next round, right? Because the truth is there's a ton of money at stake. There's a ton of money at stake. More and more money is moving. You guys all know this. I don't need to preach here. But there's problems in the market in terms of what the consumer thinks about the state of engagement today. There's tons of model in here. To me, that's an opportunity. And the question becomes, how do you get back and systematically build your way through, right? Because I think the disruptors now are getting disrupted. There's no question about it. So I'm going to use two examples here just to sort of whet your appetite, because as I size this up, and whether it's talking to our own customers or sort of forums like this, in my mind, I've sort of come up with this notion of there's two bookends between which every brand and retailer is going to have to play for the next round of commerce disruption. On one hand, you have the Uber models, right? And I pick Uber Eats here because it's owned by Uber. It's a derivative of what they do, but it's that same data-driven DNA, where on one hand, it's this notion of can I market and engage every consumer based not on a cohort, not on a segment, but on just their own behaviors, right? From the time that you order an Uber to get into one, to get out of one and pay your credit card bill a month later, at no point in that process did you ever think that anybody sold to you or marketed to you. Yet you think you got a deal and they're making billions. That is model number one, right? That's one end of the bucket. And Uber Eats, can elbow their way into a crowded market right now around food delivery because they feel like nobody's really getting in there and understanding what does it mean to have real-time data, what does it mean to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to truly be able to understand right place, right device, right time, right message, and be able to engage with consumers in a very human way, which feels like, telling me about inventory in cars, available Ubers 3 days from now doesn't really make sense. I don't care what the cohort's thinking. I need a car right now within 4 minutes because I can go to somebody else. That's a model that I don't believe other people who sell in the consumer space have really, really ingested and said, what's the closest I need to or can get to that model, right? That's one side. The second side, there's going to be a lot of this over the course of today, but one of the things that fascinates me about Amazon, and I believe should give a lot of inspiration, hope, and excitement to many people in this room. And I say this because it doesn't really matter right now whether you are a 100-year-old business, 50-year-old business, 20-year-old business. The point is, if companies like Amazon that have been around for 20 years represent the other end of that bookend, which is it's one-to-one personalization. They know what you think. They know what you know. They have your order history. They have all those things about you. But they can use machine learning and artificial intelligence to say, based on segments and cohorts, what are the right recommendations to make to you? I would venture to guess that, I'll speak for myself at least, when you look at the recommendations at the bottom of an Amazon page, you may not buy everything, but you've got to agree with me, they're pretty damn good. Like, you're like, okay, I can see why you think I might like that. So that's a notion of, again, using data in real time to be able to understand what does this person like? What have they been buying before? What are they likely to buy? And what do people like them buy? And let the machines do the work to make sense of that, right? So I would suggest that if there's sort of one framework to think about, and I think over the course of the day, we've got some ridiculously good examples of speakers here who are going to walk us through how they're looking at building those very human one-to-one connections with each of their consumers, whether they're employing an offline strategy, whether they're rethinking their supply chain and how they deliver. You're going to hear a ton of those stories. But I would say there's one thing that would be an interesting framework to think about is where do you want to play between those two bookends? One being, forget cohorts, forget segments. It's just about that one consumer. How much are they telling you, and how can you apply machine learning to be able to figure out what that is? And on the other hand, it's partly that and partly some segmentation, right? How do you fit and where do you fit between that? That is the single thing that I think will help you start to understand how you start to move towards what I'm calling extreme personalization. And like I said earlier, at least from my view of the world, and of course Kahuna's as well, I mean, the one biggest thing that I learned in my 1 year of being in this industry is there's a lot of anxiety. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with the things that I just said, right? Like, yes, data is important. Yes, real-time engagement is important. Yes, knowing the consumer is important. And frankly, yes, we have reached a point in the evolution of technology where one-to-one is not just sort of idle talk. You can actually do it right now. The technology has gotten to a point where it can be done. But the single thing that I have found where, we get to this part of the discussion, but there's still a level of anxiety because you've got these systems in place that have been there for 10 years and they're doing amazing things and they can work at scale and all of that. One of the myths in this entire discussion is for any one of you guys to want to move into that world, You're now at a point where the technology I'm talking about it's rocket fuel that can sit inside the environment. All of this doesn't require a 19-month project to rip out everything that you rely on, right? So keep that in mind. This is within reach. It's not, every time there's a technology spurt, it's about kicking everything out. We're not there, right? We're not there this time. So, you have your systems of engagement where you talk to customers, you have your analytics. This is about how do I put that rocket fuel that can start to understand stuff in real time, use the machines to figure out what the data, what are the right, why test 2 messages? Test 50 messages in 5 seconds. That's the new world, right? And let the machines help you figure out what works for Jane versus what works for Jack. That's all doable right now. That's the world we live in and we think about every day. But I always feel like that's one thing I like to tell more people. Whenever you're looking at how to get to one-to-one personalization, it is super important that you understand that this is something that can live in your environment and doesn't require those big, risky, daunting kind of removals, right? I'll just end with this. In the last annual report at Amazon, there were 4 things that were going to subsume their strategy going forward. 4 things to run the entire Amazon.com, Amazon strategy, Amazon Inc., including all their products. One of those 4 was how are they going to employ machine learning to get closer to every consumer, right? And if a company as old as them, and granted they're not the oldest, and there are many companies older than them, can start to think this way, right? Elephants can dance. You can do this if you are one of those companies, or if you're a new one, there's a ton of opportunity to get in front of this. Anyway, we're gonna talk a lot about this stuff. Here's actually one of our customers. That's the CEO of TickPick. By employing what I just talked about, they've seen over 29% increase in revenue, and just their signups have gone up by 44% because they've started to allow machine learning to figure out what is the most human way to engage with these customers. In many cases, that means send less messages. That's, again, something we're not used to. And so you're starting to see some really good tangible examples now across the industry, whether it's Amazon or TickPick, where they're employing these new ways to really build one-to-one relationships with their customers. It's anybody's game this time. This is not for just small, lean companies. If you weren't part of the game in the last round, every company, large or small, can play in what I think is going to be a super, super exciting next decade in digital commerce.